Hello, and welcome to the Enneagram in a Movie podcast, part of the Awareness to Action podcast network. This is the podcast that looks at one film in each episode and uses it to explain the 9 types and 3 instinctual biases of the Enneagram model of personality. One movie, one type. My name is Mario Sakura, and I'll be joined by Maria Jose Munita and Tamer Zanatti. We are the principals of Awareness to Action International, a global consulting and training company that specializes in practical applications of the Enneagram. You can find out more about us and our work at awareness-to-action.com. In the meantime, make some popcorn, sit back, and enjoy the show. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Enneagram in a Movie podcast. I'm Mario Sakura, here with Maria Jose Munita.
Hi, Mario. Hi, Tamer.
And with Tamer Zanatti.
Hello, Mario. Hello, Maria Jose.
So we have been through the 3 instinctual biases and through the 9 strategies, looking at films related to each one. We had a couple of 2-part episodes with special guests, Tom Condon and Russ Hudson. And today what we're going to look at is the subtypes in general. Right, we're going to look at what do we mean when we talk about subtypes, So we talked about the 2 elements of the Enneagram, the instinctual bias and the strategies. And we've talked a little bit about subtypes as we go through. But now we're going to see what happens when these 2 things come together. This is an important topic, right? So I'm curious with the both of you, because I think we all sort of learn the Enneagram as 9 personality types. Right. But when I'm curious with from the 2 of you, how understanding the subtypes has affected your use and understanding of the Enneagram.
Yeah, actually, for me, in the very beginning, when I started to learn the instinctual biases, it was not that much highlighted. And the more I understood it, the more it explained a very important phenomenon that I kept on seeing. That there are people of having the same preferred strategy, but they act a little bit different or sometimes too much different. So yeah. This explained it to me. And for myself, observing myself especially, that both the sides, the instinctual bias and my dominant instinctual bias and my preferred strategies are somehow contradicting. So it explained to me some kind of stress in certain situations that I kept on observing myself, and actually feedback I kept on receiving from especially my colleagues at work and in previous work, that somehow I have contradicting actions, and I was always dismissing that somehow they don't like me or somehow they are picking on me and so on. But it explained that.
Yeah. Good point. So we're going to talk about how sometimes these instinctual biases and these strategies reinforce each other and how sometimes they contradict each other. And you are one of those subtypes, Tamer, where those 2 things contradict each other. And so it creates this sort of almost schizophrenic personality style, right? And, a very casual use of that term. Okay,
nothing personal here.
Yeah, nothing personal, you nut.
Yeah, I can figure it
out. So it's just that you have these 2 different forces, right? So Maria Jose, how about you?
In my case, I think that it started to explain things that originally I learned by trying to kind of assigning some behaviors to the wings. So when I started truly understanding the subtypes, I realized that it was a clearer way to explain things that I could see in myself and other people, but the wings kind of fell short. They were not clear enough, or I don't want to say structured enough, but it was just too, like maybe I'm like a 1 with a 2 wing, maybe a 1 with a 9 wing, and maybe both, and maybe none. And that was not enough for me to understand kind of where some of these behaviors were coming from. And with the subtypes, I started understanding myself and others so much better. And it made the assessing of other people also a lot easier.
Yeah. So you bring up a really good point there, Maria Jose. And when we talk about this topic and Enneagram theory in general, we'll talk about the wings, right? I think that's an interesting point that you're making there. So what we're going to do as we go through this is give examples from the movies we have discussed. Okay, so we'll identify different characters and how their subtype was on display, either in a contradictory way or a reinforcing way.
Yeah, but before going to that, I would like to know your experience, Mario, with learning the instinctual biases and the subtypes. Your personal experience.
It was huge. I mean, for years I only thought about the 9 types. And so the subtypes were there, from my perspective, but the literature on them was not that great, right? A couple of sentences here and there. I think probably Wisdom of the Enneagram by Riso and Hudson was the first time they were described in any depth, but still it didn't grab me a whole lot for a while. It was not until actually I was having a conversation with a scientist friend about these 3 so-called instincts. And quite frankly, he took me to school on the science related to this stuff, right? And showed me how most of what I thought I knew and most of what I had learned was not really valid from a scientific perspective, that most of the literature on the instincts is rooted in some neo-Freudian ideas that are over 100 years old and frankly just don't hold up. So it wasn't until I really started exploring how these things made sense from a scientific perspective and started wrestling with the ideas a little bit that I really started to see the power in this. The subtypes are what we get when we combine the strategy or the Enneagram type with the instinctual bias. Okay, what other people call either the instinctual variant or the instinct. Any of those terms are, it doesn't really matter what you call them. We call it an instinctual bias because it's a bias towards a particular area of instinctual needs. Okay? And this becomes a focus of attention. Now, when I started to understand this topic in the way that I do and started changing the names from self-preservation to preserving, social to navigating, and sexual or one-to-one to transmitting, is when I really started to see the power in these ideas, particularly in the workplace. Right? And I know the two of you have had that experience of seeing how powerful these ideas are in the workplace as well. So you want to comment on that?
Sure. Look, they're really powerful. And I don't want to sound like I'm trying to sell anything, but it just, if I had to drop one of the 2 sides of the Enneagram, I would drop the types. I would drop the strategies, and I would keep the instinctual biases, because it explains so much of the basic stuff that gets people into trouble, that messes up relationships at work and at home as well. It provides so many useful insights for people to grow and to get better and to improve relationships, and it's so simple. So it has this power of simplicity, but then also very effective and useful, actionable. So it's funny how it can explain so many of the issues that I see in organizations, and it gives me a very effective and quick way to address them.
Really, when we talk about the subtypes, we like to use a yin and yang diagram or a dai chi that has the strategy on one side and the instinctual bias on the other, because it shows the relationship of these 2 things. Now, in the traditional way of speaking about the subtypes, the idea is that the instinct, it's this idea that there are 3 instincts, which again is an idea that we disagree with. There are many evolutionary adaptations that fall into 3 categories. But anyway, the idea is that humans have these 3 instincts, and our Enneagram vice or fixation interferes with the natural development, the natural expression of that instinct. And this causes the subtype. I guess that's a fine way to look at it. But again, one of the fundamental errors is to think that there are these 3 instincts rather than many different adaptations going on. right? We take a different approach, and that approach is to think about the instinctual biases as areas of focus or a kind of a system of values, right? Something we place a value on. And the strategy, the 9 strategies, represent how we go about achieving those values. Okay, so these two things work together independently, but they work together to help us kind of get our needs met.
Yes, and I think that if you don't see it that way, and if you see it as 27 independent kind of units of kind of that describe personality, there's so much room for a mistake, because it's just based on anecdotal information or your information that could be biased from the beginning. I think that seeing it, as you were saying, with the yin and yang, with these 2 dimensions being combined, and then forming or creating or explaining these 27 combinations, I think that it's more solid. It's just easier to understand, to explain, and to accurately identify who is better described by one of these 27 combinations.
There's an issue as well. You mentioned, Maria Jose, thinking about 27 different types, right? Independent types. And yes, these are variations, and there are 27 of them. Now, we hear people sometimes saying, well, you can, add the wings in there as well, and you get, let's see, what's 27 times 2? Let's see, carry the 4. 54 different versions of characters. And then other people would say, well, you can add these tri-types in as well, or whatever. And you end up with all these different boxes of people. We have to watch the tendency to think of the Enneagram as an ontological model, right? Fixed characters, fixed beings. Ontology is the study of being. It means what a thing is. We approach this as a phenomenological model, right? That is what do people do? That's why we call it preserving, navigating, and transmitting rather than preservation, navigation, and transmission. That's why we call the strategy striving to feel a certain way, because there's a fluidity here. And it's about what people do rather than how people identify themselves. And this is one of the big reasons why so many people are mistyped, I think, because they say things like, well, I know I do all the things that this type does, but that's because, my mother was this type, or, my father, or I've done a lot of work on myself or whatever, but I'm really this type. Okay. Well, no, you are what you do. And this is the way we think of these things. So what is it that a person does? Not so much how do they perceive themselves that matters to us. Okay. So we're talking about sets of dynamics at play with each other. Okay. And again, sometimes these dynamics reinforce each other. So you get some, profiles that are sort of the stereotype of the type, the transmitting 8, for example, and others that are contradictory, like the transmitting 9 with Tamer.
Yeah, I like very much the yin and yang symbol because it resembles a wave, a wave and the sea.
Yeah.
And that reminds me of the dynamics. I mean, when you look at waves, every time, according to the situation, you have different current, different forces together, they create something. So for me, it somehow reminds me that these 2 dimensions in dynamics all the time together inside me or inside others. And according to situation, they create certain pattern of thinking and certain behaviors. And that helps me a lot to understand.
Yeah. And that's what the yin-yang diagram represents, is fluidity, right? One thing blending into another. The reason there are the 2 little opposite colored dots in each half represents that the thing on one side always has a little bit of the thing on the other side in it. And there's this flow, right? There's this spinning that happens. And this can, on the one hand, make assessing people's Enneagram types a lot more difficult when we start to realize that there is this fluidity, right? That there are these subtleties at play, but it makes us much more accurate when we understand the dynamics at play. because we start to see beyond the superficial characterizations of the different Enneagram types and even different subtypes, and to start to see the nuance behind them.
Yeah, and if we go back to the use of verbs or the ontological versus whatever, how you say that.
Phenomenological,
Yes, exactly that. It is a lot easier to change a behavior than to change yourself. And now that doesn't mean that it's all superficial. I think that at the end of the day, what you want is to be more effective, more compassionate, to kind of operate better in your life and with the people that you care about. And in order to do that, you don't need to change who you are. You just have to change certain behaviors that are not effective or adaptive. And when you see the Enneagram like that, it's a lot easier for people to think about becoming a better version of themselves when it's not about changing yourself.
Right. Yeah. So on that point, I was delivering a 360 assessment to a client just yesterday, and it was some pretty rough feedback, right? I mean, the guy's a transmitting 3, very, very effective, very, very performance-oriented, but terrible people skills, right? I mean, when he doesn't get what he wants, he just becomes kind of a terror. And as we were talking, I kept telling him, look, none of this means you're a bad person. It means you're ineffective in the way you're trying to get things done, right? And as he was wrapping his head around that, he walked away from a pretty rough assessment with a feeling of hope rather than despair, right? Because if we have this idea that we have to become something different from who we fundamentally are, we're doomed to failure, right? We're simply not going to do the work required to grow. So understanding this as the things we do, understanding the Enneagram as a verb, I think is transformational in a lot of ways.
Can I share a personal story here? I mean, lots of time I get this feedback that I'm somehow pressuring people. I mean, in the beginning, I was surprised because this is not how I see myself. I see myself a compassionate person. And then when I started to contemplate on that, I mean, I have two sides. The transmitting part, which is really assertive, wanting to really get things done. I mean, pushing and driving toward certain objective, while the other side, which is my striving to feel peaceful, the strategy at point 9, that want things to be harmonious, peaceful, and all of that. So it's like these two sides looking at each other's and seeing, no, this is not me. And then, I mean, it was a moment of realization. Yeah, I do that. All what I need to do is like try to balance and try to be more effective by using these two sides. So to start with, let me accept this feedback because it's true. Next step, so maybe I need to be aware of more of how much assertive and how much effectiveness do I get by being assertive.
I think so Tamer, you're a transmitting 9, Maria Jose, you're a navigating 1, I'm a navigating 8. And I think all three of us represent in our profiles a bit of tension between the two dynamics. I think yours, Tamer, is the most obvious, right? The 9 strategy of striving to feel peaceful and the transmitting instinctual bias are in more tension than our two strategies. But still with Maria Jose, the navigating 1 does not look like the typical sort of 1, right? It's not the stereotype of the 1 and often gets misidentified and even misidentifies themselves because they see all these navigating elements that, the navigating brings this willingness to compromise, willingness to, see other points of view, whereas the 1 strategy sort of fights against that.
Yeah, so I think that it's the opposite to Tamer. Some people, not at home though, but some people think that I'm too nice sometimes and do not fit the stereotype of the 1, who is kind of more rigid and kind of strict. And I'm not like that all the time. Now, at home, I am more of that, but...
Right. Yes. You're more the 1 at home. I get it. So, and even with me, right? I mean,
with the people close to me.
Right, of course. And with me, it's the same sort of thing, right? Because of my navigating instinctual bias, I'm a little quieter, certainly, than a transmitting 8 would be. I'm a little more subtle in my approach to things, a little more shy. And people think, well, you're nice. You can't be an 8, right? And then they get to know me and they say, oh, okay, now I see it, right? But it can take a little bit longer.
Awareness to Action offers a unique approach to applying the Enneagram professionally with leaders and organizations, as well as for personal development. What makes us stand apart is our Enneagram expertise and focus on understanding human nature.
We know people because we see people. And this is a skill set that can be taught and learned. Human nature is complex and simple at the same time. Our mission is to help people see clearly and act accordingly. Why? Because the ability to see ourselves and others clearly and honestly is essential. It enables us to act in more adaptive and useful ways.
The multicultural team in Awareness to Action will help you learn tools and practices to become more aware and also to understand and engage people more effectively. Learn more at awareness-to-action.com. Join us at 2021 for exciting learning opportunities.
So the important thing to keep in mind is, again, the subtypes are filled with contradictions, and we have to be comfortable with those contradictions. And when we do our trainings, we always talk about the Walt Whitman quote from Leaves of Grass, where I think it's Leaves of Grass, where he says, do I contradict myself? Okay, I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes, right? And each of us does, right? And it's the moment we start falling into stereotypical thinking about the Enneagram that it ceases to become a useful tool in our view.
When I see people who I think, they might not be, but who I think are mistyped, the reasons they give, it's like, yeah, because, I don't know, navigating age, do this and do that.
Yeah.
And it's very specific things that they hung up on, they hung up to. And it's just not effective to do it that way, I think.
Right.
It's kind of seeing these two dimensions and how they interact, in the interplay between these two, that helps me see that. And it's more subtle than fixating on just one or two behaviors.
So what I'd like to talk about is that there are two kind of popular ideas in the Enneagram literature that I think an understanding of the instinctual biases makes us look at in a different sort of way, right? The first one is this idea of a counter type. Okay, so Claudio Naranjo, who really did a lot of work on the Enneagram in general, really, I mean, we can look at him as probably the most significant voice in the history of the Enneagram of personality as we know it, talked about this idea that within each set of subtypes, meaning each group of ones, each group of twos, each group of threes, there was one subtype that was a counter type, meaning that the fixation actually sort of went the opposite way in relationship to the instinctual bias. So the fixation of lust or of vengeance in the 8, when it comes to the navigating domain, the idea is that the social 8 doesn't express lust in the same way. I really struggle with that idea. I think what happened was Naranjo was seeing something, but didn't quite have the framework to understand what he was really seeing. Okay, so the model that he created to deal with these dichotomies he saw was this idea of a counter type. And as we know through confirmation bias, once you have an idea in mind, you can find evidence to fit it, right? So once you say that, well, the navigating 8 is the counter type of the 8, you can find evidence to prove that, right? But again, we think there's a different thing going on. We think, again, it's not so much that one of the subtypes is a counter type. That feels too rigid, too fixed for me, right? Like, well, just why would that be, right? I mean, why? Why only one in each, category? Why always at least one in each category? I really wrestle with that idea. For me, it just makes a lot more sense to see these things as a conflict between the instinctual bias and the strategy.
Yeah, and it's like with the wings that sometimes some authors think that the countertype is one, the others think that it's another one. And it has to do with what you take as the stereotype. And it depends on your definition. So you need to be
It's
careful
messy.
with that. It is messy.
It's messy. And so this brings us to, two more points. So first of all, the wings, but also you mentioned different authors, and what, we have to keep in mind when we're talking about the typical 4, the typical 5, whose description we're reading, right? Because sometimes they're different. And I even know that when I go back and look at Awareness to Action, the book that I wrote with Bob Talon, I can see the subtypes of the different types that we were describing, right? So when we're describing the 8, we're describing the navigating 8, right? When we're describing the 9, we're describing the navigating 9. Okay, so we have to be careful of who it is we're reading and pay attention to that. Now, one final point before we go into talking about the movies is the wings. Okay, so we do not teach wings. We're similar to kind of the Naranjo tradition in that we teach subtypes, but we don't teach wings. And our rationale for that is that it appears that the wing idea grew out of a group of people who were not familiar with the subtypes at the time. And they kind of took an idea that Oscar Ichazo talked about wings that was very different from how it's understood now. Sandra Maitre talks about this in her book, The Spiritual Dimension of the Enneagram. And they created this way of trying to explain these differences. Okay. And as Maria Jose was saying earlier, sometimes that's effective, sometimes not. I stopped teaching the wings a long, long time ago because I found that they actually ended up confusing people and muddying the waters a bit because they don't really fit everybody. My suspicion is that the wing idea originated in an attempt to take 3 phenomena and squeeze it into 2 buckets. Okay, 3 instinctual biases into either one wing or the other. And so it works sometimes as a descriptive mechanism, and other times it doesn't, in my view. Okay, so and again, there's a lot of people who think the wings are really, really valid. Our friend Russ Hudson, who and Tom Condon, who have been on the show, both teach wings, and it adds a lot to their work. Our view is that again, as Occam said, it is vain to do with more that which can be done with less, right? Meaning if you can explain something in 2 steps, don't add a third. So any other comments on the subtypes in general before we start giving examples?
No, I'm looking forward for examples from movies that we have discussed during the previous podcasts.
All right. So I think what we'll do here is we'll talk about the reinforcing examples first, right? Kind of the stereotypes of the types and how that shows up. But the first thing I want to say is that when, the really best way to see 3 really clear subtypes of a particular type in action is to watch, our favorite movie, The Godfather, right? Because you have 3 8s, okay? Vito, Sonny, and Michael, who each have a different subtype. Now, I know we're going to get argument in some corners of the Enneagram world because thinking that Michael is a 5. There's this idea that Al Pacino is an Enneagram type 5, which he may well be. I don't know enough about him. I haven't really studied him in order to understand whether he's a 5 or something else. But there is this view that Michael is a 5. But I think he's a preserving 8. Right. So, and which just happens to be a more quiet and intense 8, methodical, deliberate. But if the hallmark of an 8 is somebody who's interested in power and vengeance, there's no more 8-ish character in the history of movies than Michael Corleone. right? So, it could be that maybe it's a 5 playing an 8, so he doesn't look as 8-ish as others do, right? But, I think he looks clearly like an 8, right? There's that explosiveness in Michael that, I've never seen in a 5, right? Not in that sort of way.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And there's this strength, and he's grounded, and he's taking action.
Yes.
In a more detached way, so that he can kind of plot the revenge effectively, or his plans, but he's in no way detaching from the messiness of the world. I mean, he's
right.
watching it, but he's creating it. He's creating the messiness. He's not avoiding it or detaching it from it.
Yeah. You don't detach from the messiness of life by agreeing to go shoot a police captain and a mobster in a restaurant, right? And
it's not even agreeing, because that's almost like passive.
Right.
He
it was his
came
plan.
up with that idea.
Yes. So, and, there's that great, I don't know how to call it great scene, but indicative scene where he
happens to be great. Okay.
Yeah. Well, when he tells Kay, right, when she tells him that, she had an abortion, and he just explodes, right? And, and there's this just fury and rage that, again, feels so grounded in him, right? This does not come from, we see 5s kind of losing their cool, but it doesn't feel that scary, right? It feels, I don't know, unnatural. It feels really natural in Michael, right? Yeah. I mean, there's, so, and he's so methodical, so deliberate, so, planning and operational. And when I think of the preserving 8, I always think of operations leaders or procurement leaders in organizations, right? Who are just going to make sure that the trains run on time, and are going to make sure that anybody who does not meet their deadlines and schedules are going to hear about it, right? And things are going to get done.
Yeah, and the idea of revenge is the theme of revenge keeps on coming back in the actions of Michael all the time.
Yes.
So it's like very core thing that he has to get revenge from whomever betrayed him or did him something wrong or took something from his territory or so on.
Yes. So the preserving 8 is, it's clearly an 8, but it's not the stereotype of the 8, which would be more of a Sonny Corleone, played by James Caan, right? I've been a big James Caan fan, right? I mean, there are movies like Thief, the Michael Mann movie, which is just one of my all-time favorites, which is this just picture perfect depiction of a transmitting 8 character. But he almost always plays an 8. I really can't think of a role in which he didn't. But he is that explosive, aggressive, talkative, always in charge, right? Except when Vito's in the room, right? But any other time, it's like Sonny is dominating the space. Right. And this is what we often think of as an 8, right? Somebody who's loud and outgoing and talkative and, taking up all the space in the room. Michael doesn't. Impulsive, right?
Yeah. But I was thinking about that scene when Michael is, and it will be so, it's so tempting to talk about this and not talk about the other characters. But let's finish with this idea. So when Michael is saying that he will go and shoot the police officer, those 2 guys, Sonny is trying to stay in charge,
yes.
But Michael is not allowing it. So there's this power fight with Michael not being that vocal or that explosive, but he's still owning some space.
Yes.
And you can see how Sonny just can't own the whole space with Michael there.
Yes. But everybody else sort of fades into the background.
Yes, of course. And if Michael weren't there, Sonny would be in charge, of course.
So now Vito, on the other hand, played by Marlon Brando, is a classic example of a navigating 8. Right. And he's quieter and thoughtful and more contradictory, I think, right? And it's always interesting to me when we, in our trainings, we'll use a clip from The Godfather as a quiz for people, kind of a name that type sort of exercise. And I'm always amazed at how many people see him as a 9. The Vito character, right? And, and what they're missing is that, first of all, there's no issue around conflict with Vito, right? I mean, Vito's tagline is, I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse, right? I mean, Vito's got no issues around, getting along with people, but he's quieter and softer and more strategic and, but when it comes right down to it, he's the Godfather. Right. And, this is the kind of thing we see with navigating 8s as well. And so that's a great example of being able to sort of compare how the instinctual bias and strategy can really create different characters in this way. I always like to compare the strategy and the instinctual bias to height and weight. Right. So, for example, if we each have, a certain height and we have a certain weight. And if you say that somebody is 200 pounds, which is probably about 85 or 90 kilograms, okay, that tells me something. But if you tell me that they're 6 feet tall versus 5 feet tall, that tells me something different, right? These two people look very different from each other, even though they're both the same weight. And likewise, you can tell me somebody is 6 foot tall and weighs 150 pounds, or they weigh 250 pounds. And yes, there's similar characteristics, but also very big differences to notice as well.
Are you interested in learning more about our approach to the Enneagram? Go to awareness-to-action.com and check out our certification program. We offer a clear, concise, business-friendly, and science-minded approach while maintaining the depth of traditional approaches to the system. At Awareness to Action International, we're the leading innovators in the theory and pragmatic applications of this system to all aspects of the work environment, including leadership and personal development, team building, diversity and culture, and managing change. However, this approach is not just for the business world. A lot of people who attend our trainings do so for their own self-development or spiritual growth. Our certification program is one of only a handful of curricula accredited as a school by the International Enneagram Association. It is currently being conducted virtually and combines live sessions with asynchronous learning. Again, find out more at awareness-to-action.com.
Sunny is a great example of an instance when the instinctual bias and the strategy are similar to each other. Okay. Another example that we visited in our podcast was Jerry Maguire. I think we agreed was probably a transmitting 3 sort of character. So tell me how those two qualities reinforced each other in Jerry Maguire.
He's clearly wanting to succeed and to accomplish his goals and has goals in mind. They change over time during the movie, but it's all about where he wants to go and how to get there and failing or not. And so the theme is around that, but also how he does it as well. It's the kind of goals, and they all have to do with, it's in a transmitting way. So it's almost like a legacy. He wants to change the way in which his job is done. And he wants to make his clients, which are sports people, famous and get visibility. So it's transmitting things in a successful or outstanding way.
Which reinforces that, right? I mean, it's all the more about standing out, and it's all the more about transmitting. Is I want, and he even talked, the whole thing that kicks off Jerry Maguire's trouble is writing this manifesto, right? Which is really what it was. He called it a mission statement, I think, but it was this big fat document of, I have all these ideas on the way something could be, and I want to change the world. I want to change this industry. I want to make people stars. I want to make them, wearing their own shoes, wearing their own shirt on a cereal box, and all this sort of stuff, right?
The memo.
The memo, yes. So yeah, absolutely reinforce each other right now. Whereas, and there's also.
And I was just thinking that the fact that that everyone called it a memo just diminished the vision that he had. So he saw this as something to change the world, as you were saying, and people kept calling it the memo, which is just.
Yes. Right. And, the other thing that, stood out to me about Jerry Maguire as we're talking about it now is his blindness around political skills, right? He was a great sales guy. He was a great inspirer of clients and that sort of thing. But he really didn't see what was happening around him. Unlike, say, the Jay Moore character, which is the guy that fired him. I forget his name in the movie, but that's
Bob
more
Sugar?
of a Bob Sugar, yes. That's more of a navigating three, right? The more politically astute, kind of tell people what they want to hear, and maneuver through the machinations of the organization to, in a very political way, right? Jerry Maguire was not political. Okay? He missed it. He didn't realize that he made a huge mistake. Well, he kind of realized he made a huge mistake, but he made it to begin with, and then he didn't realize what they were all going to do to him, even though it was pretty clear. With the preserving three, we get a character, again, who's very different, often doesn't look like a three because they're not as image conscious as the stereotype. There's somebody who's methodical, work-oriented, and, more under the radar than the other two versions of the three.
Yeah, and they are image conscious, but they don't draw attention as the others might, right. I think. And it's, the preserving thing. And so when preservers have transmitting as the zone of indifference. So it's like they want to feel outstanding, but without drawing too much attention. So it's more conflicted.
Yeah.
And less risk-taking than transmitting three as well.
For sure.
So, I would say that preserving three would be more of protecting their successes versus transmitting three would be looking for taking risks for new successes.
Absolutely right. And we see this kind of across the board on preservers and navigators, right? Preservers tend to be more cautious and conservative with their resources, including money, whereas transmitters tend to be more, we'll say, abundance mindset, with their resources and think, what, I'm going to splurge now and then I'll go make more, right? And I'll figure it out. I'm going to go, here's an opportunity to do something really big. I'm going to, achieve something. And then, so we see transmitters either building huge empires or going bankrupt and, then doing it over and over again, right? So,
and actually, this is somehow the story of Jerry Maguire. I mean, trying to build an empire, and he took a big risk that he puts him in a very bad career situation.
Exactly. So another example of a profile that's kind of reinforcing the instinctual bias and the strategy being similar is our friend Jeffrey Lebowski, the dude. Okay?
It's more of your friend than our friend.
You need to watch the movie again, Maria Jose, through this new lens of appreciation.
That's a tough one, watching the movie again.
Jerry Maguire. The Big Lebowski is one of the towering achievements in the history of film. Although it's like whiskey, right? Those who love it, those who don't think it tastes disgusting, right? So I'm a big Lebowski fan. But regardless whether or not we like the movie, it captures the idea of a nine, and certainly the Jeff Bridges character of the dude, or Jeffrey Lebowski, we think he's probably a navigating nine. Now, people might think, because of his obsession over, the rug in his room, which really, tied the room together, because of his obsession about the rug, that he would be a preserving nine, right? But nothing
preserving about that home.
Exactly right. I mean, I had
it just had a rug, but that's about it.
That's right. So, it's funny because I had a client some years ago who was a navigating nine, and this guy was very successful, and he made a lot of money and provided, nice things for his family and had a big house and all this stuff. But he said to me one time, I could live in a cardboard box. It wouldn't matter to me, right? He had the house for his family and his wife and all that sort of thing. And that's what I keep thinking of when I think of The Big Lebowski, right? That apartment was not much nicer than your average refrigerator box, right? That somebody might live in. So, but with Lebowski, the big issue was turning over of his agenda to people, right? Of going along with peer pressure and with the flow of things and giving in to stronger personalities, and then getting frustrated that he had done so, and then almost jumping to an equally reckless behavior, right? And this is something we can see in the Navigating Nine, right? They lose themselves in the group. They lose themselves to other people's agendas. Now, again, the Nine is an example of a type who, it depends on whose description of the Nine you're reading over whether or not you see this of the stereotype or not. Some people would have it as the more preserving version of the Nine, but almost nobody has the transmitting Nine as their example of the stereotype of the Nine, right? In fact, we find that most transmitting Nines are mistyped because it's so counter to the subtype. Right?
Yeah, and I've not seen accurate descriptions of the transmitting Nine, to be honest, or descriptions that fit what we think of the transmitting Nine.
Right. I would agree.
Yeah, so, and to me, although some of these combinations or subtypes are less intuitive or they contradict each other, to me, the contradiction of the transmitting Nine, it's one of the biggest.
Yeah, I remember writing the chapter on the Nine for Awareness to Action many years ago. And again, when I read it now, I can see that we are describing a navigating Nine because that's what Bob was, right? And other people we knew. And I remember sharing it with a friend who was a transmitting Nine. Now, I knew he was a Nine, but I didn't understand the subtypes too much at that point. And when I shared that chapter with him, he said, "That's not me at all." Right? Now, I knew he was a Nine, but it just was not him. Right? Now, a few years ago, when I showed him the description of the transmitting Nine, he said, "Oh my God, that's me to a T." Right. So again, it just goes to show you the difference in this character. Okay. So one other example popped to mind of sort of a stereotypical version, and it was the woman from Lost in Translation, played by the actress Anna Faris, who I forget her character's name. It was a character based on Cameron Diaz, right? Sofia Coppola kind of had her knives out for Cameron Diaz when she wrote the script. Well, that was her pseudonym. That was her hotel name, right? That was her hotel name, right? Evelyn Wall. And but she was just, again, this was the stereotype of the Seven, right? Talking all the time, bouncing, jumping from topic to topic, needing attention, right? And this is what the standard perception of the Seven is. But that's certainly not all Sevens. And we're going to talk about an example of something that looks very different in a moment. But Sevens who are transmitting Sevens, I think, get identified fairly easily as Sevens. But a lot of time the preserving Sevens and navigating Sevens don't. So you can go back and look at those characters if you want to see examples of characters where the instinctual bias and the strategy really reinforce each other. So let's talk about some examples where the strategy and the instinctual bias contradict each other, to a degree, right? And make for a character that is harder to identify. Now, we already talked about Vito Corleone, about how, again, the navigating bias and the striving to feel powerful are in tension with each other in the expression of navigating eight's behavior, right? So we don't need to go through that one.
And actually, what I wanted to discuss here, I mean, even in this movie, you can see Vito in different modes. So the opening scene, you see this, power. I mean, although it's really subtle, but it's really obvious in the whole scene, in the way he's treating the Undertaker. Is this
the Undertaker? Yes,
the Undertaker, or treating his men, or they treat him. So it's really full of power. versus the discussion with Solozzo. It was more subtle than that, and so this explains to me how these contradicting forces, when they manifest, they can manifest in different ways depending on situation. I don't know what's your opinion on that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that opening scene, I think for the first 5 minutes of the movie, Brando literally only moves his finger, right? I mean, that's, and he plays with the cat a little bit, right? But I mean, he's sitting there like a lizard on a rock, right? I mean, just, not really moving but still oozing, authority and power. And then when he gets up and he, kind of, confronts the Undertaker a little bit, you see a bit more of that explosiveness, right? And you see it even more when he talks to Johnny Fontaine, right? And Johnny Fontaine is the actor or, singer who, comes to him for help. And, first Vito is hugging him and kissing him and, just, how you doing? Tell me. And then he kind of grabs him by his lapels and shakes him and says, be a man, and really, expresses anger and frustration, disappointment and power.
I was thinking about how, and going back to The Godfather, but how it is just so clear how they show the power or get angry at over the things of the domain, the instinctual domain that they care the most about. So then be a man, it's like the role, what you're projecting, how you're being perceived. And it drives him crazy that he isn't acting like a man.
Yes.
And with Michael, it's all about the logistics and the family and kind of those things. And with Sonny, it's about growing the business and fighting with other people. So it is so clear that it's kind of power, but in different domains.
Yeah. And frankly, it's about lust too with Sonny, right? I mean, Sonny's, I can't think of a polite word to describe him, but Sonny, Sonny's a lustful guy, right? So, so transmitting lust, is pretty clear there.
Yeah.
I think another really good example of a contradictory character is, again, from The Big Lebowski, but Walter, his friend, right, who is a transmitting six, who is played by John Goodman, who is a very loud and aggressive character, right, who is, who really causes all the trouble in the movie, right, comes up with these ideas to do stupid and dangerous things and, pulls a gun on a fellow bowler at one point, right? And, but he's a six, right? I mean, he's somebody who's striving to feel secure, but he's a transmitting six. And in a lot of the Enneagram literature, we hear this talk about counterphobic sixes. And in our experiences, all sixes show some degree of counterphobia, meaning they feel fear and they react against it in an aggressive way. But the one that we see this the most in is the transmitting six. Okay, so the stereotype of the six is sort of a Woody Allen-ish character, right? Or more like the Albert Brooks character in Defending Your Life, somebody who's more obviously fearful. If you see Walter in The Big Lebowski, you're not going to think of Woody Allen in the same chain of thoughts.
Yeah, I was thinking about that character, the Defending Your Life character. Yeah. That was more, as you say, a stereotypical one. But with Walter, six. But with Walter, so you could get confused by how aggressive he was.
Right.
I don't see how, but I can understand that you can get confused.
Right. Yeah.
But it's a less grounded aggressiveness.
Yes.
There's more anxiety behind it.
Yes.
And that to me, it's a kind of like something key when I'm trying to differentiate between an 8 and a transmitting 6. It's this anxiety that it's so visible.
Yes. Yeah.
Although they could be equally or even more aggressive than an 8.
Yeah.
But it's kind of less focused or...
Yeah, it comes from a place of insecurity, right? Yeah. I mean, so we talk about the 6 striving to feel secure. When they don't feel secure, they feel insecure. Okay. So in the transmitting six, we see this aggressiveness that's rooted in insecurity, which is not what we see in Vito, Michael, or Sonny. Okay. Of course, everybody gets afraid sometimes. Michael was nervous when, he was going to shoot Sollozzo and the police captain, but anybody would be, right? That doesn't mean he was a six because he was a little nervous before he was about to shoot two people in a restaurant. Just means he's human. Okay. So, but the transmitting six's aggression tends to be driven by a lack of feeling secure.
Yeah, and it's obvious in how they express the rationale of their actions. Like Walter is always expressing that there's a threat that he wants really to fight against or prevent the threat from.
Yes.
So he's like, aggression is coming from a place of protection.
Yes. If we don't do this, then they will do that to us, right? Is this kind of the theme that comes through. Okay. All right. So another character is the Tom Hanks character in the movie Castaway. Right. So we used Castaway as an example of the preserving instinctual bias. And when we discussed the movie, I think we agreed that he probably seemed like a preserving 7 to us. Okay. And I think in most movies I see Tom Hanks plays a 7-ish sort of character. I read somewhere that Tom Hanks, was a 6, and I've read other places he was a 9 or something. He strikes me as a 7. Right? Just kind of a joyful, happy kind of guy. And I think that came through in the movie Castaway. But his preserving instinctual bias made him look really one-ish in a lot of ways, right? If you think about the beginning of that movie, it's all about literally getting the trucks out on time, right? It's all about time. It's all about process. It's all about details. And it's not just because that's what his job was, although, of course, that would influence it. But
he wouldn't be in that job if he didn't care about those things.
Exactly right. Or he wouldn't last in that job if he didn't, for sure, right? And this is something we see in preserving 7s, is this real one-ish sort of behavior, or behavior that can be interpreted as one-ish because there's a rigidity to it. There's a kind of an intensity about it. Things aren't going the way they should. There's a problem, right? They'll get nervous about being late. They'll get nervous about forgetting things. They'll get, and there's it's the combination of sort of that reliance of the support strategy at point 1 and the instinctual bias that if you look at them a certain way, you can mistake them for ones. This is something we see quite frequently, that we have ones who are people who think they're ones, but the pieces just don't add up when you look at them, right? They're like a happy one.
Yes, they're light. I was going to say they're lighter, not happy, but it could be seen from the outside. I agree.
Yeah. Yes, that was the wrong term to use, right? So, but it's this, I always think particularly those who would identify themselves as a preserving one, if they recognize the preserving. I always remember this boss I had some years ago who was a preserving one. And every time the group of us would go out for lunch, kind of a business lunch or something, no matter what they put in front of her as a meal, right? She would order the meal. And no matter what they put in front of her, she would make what we all called the stink face, right? She would just automatically assume there's something wrong with it and I'm going to find it, right? So it's like somebody placed a pile of garbage in front of her, right? Was the look on her face until she thoroughly inspected it and realized, okay, everything's all right, right? And then she would feel content again, right? So that's it. In the preserving ones, we see this more sort of dour, serious, kind of starting off negative kind of perspective, right? Which we don't see in the preserving 7. Right? The Tom Hanks character there was, he was a bouncy, positive sort of guy. But that focus on logistics was there, right? That focus on details, even to the degree, he was keeping records of the winds in his cave and, the tides and all that sort of stuff, right? Which served him well to get him off the island.
One of the behaviors that I noticed the contradicting behaviors, the same way that I observed in my transmitting 9, the behavior that I see contradicting in preserving 7, that sometimes they are too much risk taking, and sometimes they are too much risk averse. It depends really on the situation.
Yes, you're absolutely right. They bounce back and forth, sort of ping pong between, hey, let's do this crazy thing, and oh no, wait, we better not do this because, it'll cost too much, or I'll be too tired, or, whatever it is, right? So that's a really good example. It's funny, I think too that, one of the things I think is important to point out here, since we're talking about perspectives on subtypes, most of the Enneagram literature around subtypes tends to focus on relationships and how these things manifest in relationships. Okay. And even, the preserving thing to some extent, right? So, and what I mean by this is that, or why I think this is because in self-help sort of environments, workshops on relationships really sell. Right. And that's what a lot of people want to talk about. Okay. So the conversation is about relationships. And so the focus tends to be on what these things look like. Okay. So what we see is a lot of preservers, and particularly preserving 7s, see themselves as a sexual 7 sometimes. Right. And because there's this idea of being a sexual or 1-to-1 7, the preserving 7 is just not really understood. There is this need in the preserving 7 for closeness to the significant other. And again, we see this in the Tom Hanks character with the Wilson. Yeah, absolutely. Who became kind of a substitute for Kelly, right? The Helen Hunt character. Anyway, so there's a lot going on here that can be really confusing for people when it comes to this.
Yeah, I was also thinking about the Meryl Streep character in Defending Your Life, which I think we agreed that she might be a navigating 7.
Yes.
That's also, I think, a subtype that it's not always understood.
Yes.
And many transmitting 7s see themselves as navigating 7s because they're very social. But the navigating 7 is less of like a group, a big group person. But they have this light quality, but they're not that talkative. So it's, not always, not the center of the party, but
right.
If they're comfortable with you, they might talk a lot. But
yes,
it is a character that it's not always understood and many times mistyped.
Absolutely right. This really is one of the Enneagram types that's deeply misunderstood, I think, and talked about in various, very stereotypical ways. I don't know of any Enneagram authors that are 7s. I might be overlooking somebody, but I don't think anybody's really written about this a lot from the inside out. And that's not because 7s can't finish a book. It's, it just is the way it is, right? I mean, the stereotype that 7s can't finish thing, we've talked about a lot. It's just not the reality.
Are you interested in learning more about our approach to the Enneagram? Go to awareness-to-action.com and check out our certification program. We offer a clear, concise, business-friendly, and science-minded approach while maintaining the depth of traditional approaches to the system. At Awareness to Action International, we're the leading innovators in the theory and pragmatic applications of this system to all aspects of the work environment, including leadership and personal development, team building, diversity and culture, and managing change. However, this approach is not just for the business world. A lot of people who attend our trainings do so for their own self-development or spiritual growth. Our certification program is one of only a handful of curricula accredited as a school by the International Enneagram Association. It is currently being conducted virtually and combines live sessions with asynchronous learning. Again, find out more at awareness-to-action.com.
So yes, I completely agree that the navigating 7 often doesn't look 7-ish, very often confused as 2s. And it's funny, as we were talking about this, I was thinking about attending It was somebody's session at an IEA conference one time where they were talking about the subtypes, and they used Hugh Hefner as an example of a preserving seven. Now, I don't know if you guys know who Hugh Hefner is, being outside of the U.S. So Hugh Hefner in the 1950s founded Playboy magazine, right? Which is inaugural.
No way he's a preserver. I mean, what are you talking about? Not just because of what he did, but now that I can picture him in my mind, it just...
No. So let me finish my thought here, Maria Jose, and then you can jump on this idea some more, right? But so Hugh Hefner, for young people who might be listening, he's kind of a person of the past, started Playboy magazine, famous for publishing nude pictures of Marilyn Monroe in its first episode, famous for nude magazines and the libertarian lifestyle to a certain extent, right? Or the libertine lifestyle, a better word. He had the Playboy Mansion in Los Angeles, which was a place where Hollywood actors and actresses, mostly actors, I think, but some actresses as well, would go for parties on the weekends that would turn into orgies and all of these things, right? And, and at the end of his life, while he was in his late 70s, early 80s, was married to 3 young, blonde, artificially enhanced women who were, 60 years younger than him or something, right? So, yeah, I'm sorry if there's not a better example of somebody who's a transmitter, I don't know what it is, right? But
and there's people who think or thought that Trump was a preserver.
Yes, a preserving aid. Yeah, and again, the archetypal transmitter, right?
Yeah, but it's because they have resources. They accumulate resources, and we need to be really careful with that.
Yeah, I think one of the justifications for Hefner being a self-pres 7 was that he liked to wear pajamas and didn't leave the house very often.
Why get dressed?
Right. So anyway, so again, it just points to when your first principles are not very clear, you're going to make bad conclusions about assessing type, right? So you always have to pay attention to the first principle. Is this person preserving, navigating, or transmitting? And then what strategies at play? Okay?
Yeah, and I was thinking about other stereotypes that might be confusing when you're trying to assess a person. And going back to the movies that we talked about, I was thinking about Almost Famous and how the Kate Hudson role, it was a transmitting too, and she was kind of a helper, but not necessarily what she was. She was not going out of her way to make sure that everybody had what they needed. It was more of her agenda with a few people that she cared about, and it's not what we think as the helper. I think in her mind, she was helping people thrive or become famous, but it was not the stereotype. So any subtype, not any, but many subtypes can be seen as a countertype or not the stereotype. But it depends on how you describe it.
Yeah, for sure.
So some labels have an impact on that. If you call someone the helper, then if it's not helping, it's a countertype.
Absolutely.
Or things like that. Yeah,
absolutely. So one other example of kind of a contradictory character that I wanted to talk about was Charlotte from Lost in Translation, played by Scarlett Johansson. Now, we identified her as a navigating 4, and it's interesting when I posted the description of that on social media, there were some people in the Enneagram world who, sort of attacked the assessment and the description of the movie as a 4-ish sort of movie, because the perception of these people was that 4s are angry and venomous I mean, this is the words they used, angry and venomous and dark and all of these things. And again, that's a stereotypical understanding of the type based on one particular interpretation. We often see that kind of behavior in more unhealthy fours, and particularly more unhealthy transmitting fours. But navigating fours have a different feel to them. And you see that darkness, you see that tendency toward kind of fairly extreme melancholy that they can sink into. But most of the time, they certainly don't feel angry and venomous. And, and this speaks to, I think, for one of the reasons is so much of the stereotyping in the Enneagram literature is that they're writing about people who are attracted to Enneagram workshops. And they're not out there working with people in the real world, like the business world. And so they don't see examples of, say, a navigating 4 that's a pretty healthy person who's not so self-obsessed that they spend all their time in self-help workshops.
Yeah, it's like a more functional version.
More functional version.
Of the types and of the subtypes. I think that because it's self-selected, like
Yes.
the audience that some people get exposed to, and the other people don't look for help.
Right. Yeah. So the navigating 4 in our experience is kind of a more subtle 4. Certainly, again, this melancholy and this desire to express their uniqueness or to find their own uniqueness, but they do it in a way that allows them to fit in with other people more effectively. Now, sometimes that'll express itself by fitting in with a bunch of sort of outcast people. I think of, people who join, groups of, other misfit, like goths, for example. You might see navigating 4 sort of join in with that crowd. But again, they're not going to be the angry, aggressive types that we'll see in, some of the transmitting 4s. The preserving 4, on the other hand, is, I think you actually see sort of a darker quality in most preserving 4s than you do in the navigating 4s, in my experience. Right?
Yeah, in fact, so many times we see navigating 4s confused as 7s.
7s and 9s too, right? I'll say, right? I mean, and that's one of the things that these people criticizing me on Facebook were saying, no, you're talking about 9s. No, you're talking about navigating 4s, right? So, is my view. Were you going to say something, Tamer?
No, I see the preserving 4, they have this grounded quality versus the preserving 4. I was talking about the preserving. They have this grounded quality that makes them look not look like 4 a lot.
Right.
So, yeah.
On the surface, they often look kind of 3-ish. Right,
yes.
Appears sort of 3-ish, but then you see the melancholy set in, in a way that we don't see in 3s.
But I see in the 2 dimensions, the navigating and the 4, something common, which is the interest about identity. So somehow I see, although it's contradicting subtypes, but I see a common, a stress on identity somehow. How do you see that?
Yeah, so I'm sorry, with the preserving 4 or
the navigating 4?
The navigating 4. Oh, absolutely. It's all about identity, right? It's all about who am I, right? Who am I? Where do I fit in? And what's wrong with me? I was watching a movie last night called Roxanne with Steve Martin, the comedian and actor. I still think of him as a comedian from the 70s. But so Roxanne is a movie, I don't know, late 80s, probably late 80s. It's a takeoff on Cyrano de Bergerac, right? The guy with the big nose, okay, who falls in love with the woman, but is embarrassed about the size of his nose. So he helps another guy sort of court her. But Cyrano does all the writing of the poetry and whispers to the other guy who says the stuff to her and, falls in love, etc. Right. So, but it was very much, it's a 4-ish kind of character, right? There's a great version of Cyrano de Bergerac with Gerard Depardieu from 80s or probably the 80s as well. But it's a very 4-ish character. And the Steve Martin version, now Steve Martin, I think, is a 4 in real life, right? Very focused on the arts. He was an art collector, could even be a preserving 4 because of his, focus on elegance and that sort of thing. And playing this character, but it was not an angry character, right? It was not this dark, goth-like, 9-inch nails sort of 4-ish character that we might think of. It was a lighter, funnier 4, but with a darkness underneath him, this anger, this sorrow, this melancholy, right? But very personable on the surface. So it's a good movie. You should, if you get a chance, you should add it to the list of movies to watch. Roxanne with Steve Martin and Daryl.
I did already. So
you've seen it?
So I will not watch it again.
Well, like I always say, it wasn't Citizen Kane, but it was all right. So, okay. So that kind of wraps up our episode on the subtypes. And subtypes is an interesting topic, and so we encourage people to go back and listen to other episodes and rewatch some of the movies to see these distinctions that we've talked about. It will help deepen our understanding of the subtypes.
And I would recommend, and this is what we talk about in our trainings, that don't try too hard to identify which of the 27 subtypes someone is.
Yeah.
Take a look at the instinctual biases and see which one is more visible or kind of primary. And then look at the 9 strategies and see which one might be the preferred strategy, and then make the combination. That is a safer way to assess someone's subtype effectively than trying to take a look at 27 options and choose one of those.
Yeah, it's almost like a math problem, right? An addition problem, not even a multiplication problem. It's like a math problem. And once you figure out what the 2 main integers are, the question answers itself, right? If I find out that, one thing is, 5, and I have to add it to 4, I get, 5 plus 4, carry the 4, 9, right? So there's no real question about it. Okay, we just sort of, okay, well, we know that they're preserving. We know that they're a 7. That means they're a preserving 7. Okay, so just settle one problem, settle the next problem, and then the final solution answers itself. So next time on the Enneagram in a Movie podcast, we're going to go into a topic related to the Enneagram that we haven't talked about yet in our 3 or 4 years of doing this podcast, the core qualities of the Enneagram types. So for us, the core qualities are a deeper dimension at what's at the heart of each of us and at what influences the expression of our Enneagram type. And we are going to look at the core qualities through the lens of one of the all-time great movie characters, an enduring character who has entertained and thrilled and inspired generations of people, Philadelphia's own Rocky Balboa. Okay, so we're going to take a look at 3 of the Rocky movies. Okay, we're going to take a look at the movie Rocky. We're going to then skip over Rocky 2, Rocky 3, Rocky 4, and Rocky 5 because they really, really suck. And we're going to talk about the movie Rocky Balboa from the early 2000s. And then we're going to talk about the movie Creed, which is not about Rocky, but it includes the character Rocky. And what we're going to show is how the character of Rocky shows the stunting of the 3 core qualities found at the inner triangle of the Enneagram, and how it shows the maturation of these qualities over time. So I'm a big fan of Rocky. I don't know that we've talked about it on the show. Honestly, doing this podcast is just a chance for me to talk about Rocky, but I figured out a way to tie it to one of the things we teach so that I got the chance to talk about Rocky. So as a Philadelphia boy, Rocky is really important to me, and looking forward to that episode. As are Maria, Jose, and Tamer, I'm sure.
I am, more than some of the other movies. And I think that although it could have been just a way for you to justify watching Rocky and discussing it, watching Rocky again, by the way.
Again and again.
And
Yes.
again and again. I saw Rocky in the movie theater in 1976, just so you know.
Wow, when I was 2 years old. So it does show the core qualities relevant for his type and the accelerators, and you had what you said about the maturation of them in a brilliant way. So I'm looking forward to it as well.
And also the character of Rocky, and one of the reasons it kind of got onto our radar again, was because the character of Rocky is one of those subtypes that's contradictory, right? He's a transmitting 9 character. So at times doesn't look like a 9 at all, but at other times does. Okay?
Yeah.
So looking forward to that conversation and forward to seeing everybody again next week. See you guys. Talk soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Enneagram in a Movie podcast, part of the Awareness to Action podcast network. Find out more about the Enneagram and our offerings at awareness-to-action.com. And if you enjoyed the episode, please go online and give us a review. We'll see you next time.